Elena felt her heart pounding in her chest as she watched the alignment of the stars. She was standing in front of the portal. The bright light in front of her was shimmering, rippling like the surface of water. This is a chance, she thought. A chance. But for what? To return to Gaspard? Or to truly reunite with the time she belonged to? Despite the echoing questions in her mind, her feet did not take a step back. Lucian's words continued to resonate in her head. You cannot be the master of time. You must be willing to become a part of it. Elena closed her eyes, suppressing all her fears, and took her first step, and the world tilted once again. When Elena opened her eyes, at first she thought nothing had changed. In front of her were familiar streets, billboards glowing with neon lights, and the pale glow of phone screens reflected on people's faces. Car horns, people walking briskly, a frantic crowd trying to catch up to somewhere. This was the world she knew, the world she had grown up in. But now she didn't know if it was the world she belonged to. She felt a void pressing in on her. It was as if she had forgotten how to belong here. She took a step, then another. The asphalt beneath her shoes felt like not a solid surface, but a swamp trying to pull her in. Her steps were light, but her soul was heavy. She walked. She looked at the faces of the people. None of them were looking at her. She was in the middle of the crowd, but she felt invisible. In the past, in Versailles, everything had been different. There, when she walked, everyone greeted each other. The sound of footsteps echoed on the stone floors, making one's presence known. Gaspard's eyes always found her. His presence gave meaning to Elena's world. But here, no one cared about her existence. Elena kept walking, hoping to see a familiar face. She finally reached an old cafe, the one she had visited with her father when she was little, the place where they used to sit for hours at the wooden tables. She opened the glass door and stepped inside. A faint smell of coffee reached her nose, but strangely, it didn't make her feel anything. Daniel and Emma were inside. When she saw them, she hoped that the feeling of loneliness inside her would vanish, but it didn't. "Elena!" Emma said cheerfully as she saw her. She stood up and hugged her. Elena accepted the hug, but the response her body gave to Emma's arms felt like the reaction to the touch of a stranger. When Daniel got up and hugged her as well, Elena felt completely alienated. She had loved them. Yes. But when she had loved them, Elena was someone else. Now she was someone different. Elena sat at a table. She didn't even notice the coffee placed in front of her. Daniel and Emma were talking, but their voices sounded like distant echoes in her ears. Emma smiled. "You're finally here," she said. "We missed you so much. Where have you been?" Elena turned her eyes toward her. Where had she been? She had gone as far as she could, but that couldn't be an answer. "I went a little far," she said at last. Her voice felt like it didn't even belong to her. Daniel held her hand. "It doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is that you're here now." But was Elena really here? For a moment, her eyes lingered on Daniel's hands. Those hands were so familiar, but they weren't like Gaspard's hands. Gaspard's hands, his warmth, his touch. When she thought of him, she felt her heart tighten. Emma's voice trailed off. Daniel was saying something, but the words no longer reached Elena's ears. Her mind was somewhere else. There, beside Gaspard. She had fought so hard to return to this world, but now here she realized she didn't truly want to return. If returning meant leaving Gaspard behind, then she shouldn't return. She needed him, and maybe he needed her. In that moment, she understood. This world didn't belong to her. She had to go back. Elena had realized she couldn't stay here anymore. Every moment without Gaspard was creating a void deep within her soul. She had returned here, to her old life, but nothing felt the same. Everything was colder, more colorless. The world seemed to have lost its reality. In that moment, she remembered the last words Gaspard had whispered to her. "Don't lose me." But had she already lost him? There was only one way to find out. There was only one thought left in Elena's mind. The portal had to open again. But how? She had passed through the portal before, but she couldn't exactly remember how the process worked. Her old notes, the ancient texts she had seen in Versailles, what Lucian had told her, she needed to go over them all again. First, she would have to wait for the night, The gates of time didn't open at any moment. They required the alignment of the stars. There must have been a meaning to this. What had been the key to opening the door in the past? She thought. That night had been filled with the fear of loss. In that moment, she had been ready to give everything, with her heart, her soul, her body. Maybe the gates of time only opened for those who truly formed a connection. And now she wanted nothing more than Gaspard. This time, she would consciously open the portal. But first, there was a place she needed to go. Elena immediately bought a plane ticket to Paris. Her heart was beating as fast as the plane's engine. She would see those old stone corridors, the gold-leafed walls, and the historic palace filled with a faint echo at night once again. When she got off the plane, the air was cold, but that couldn't stop her. She hopped into the first taxi she saw and headed toward Versailles. Her eyes were watching the outside through the window, but her mind was completely elsewhere. What if the portal didn't open again? What if she couldn't return? Had Gaspard already forgotten her? Just thinking about it squeezed her heart. But despite her fears, she couldn't stop. When she finally reached Versailles, she entered like a tourist. But her steps were quick. She pushed through the crowd, making her way to the old sections. Lucien's words echoed in her mind. You cannot be the master of time. You must be willing to become a part of it. She understood those words now. She couldn't control time, but she could accept the opportunities time offered. She could create the energy to open the portal. When Elena reached one of the oldest corridors of the palace, she headed toward the spot where she had passed through the portal in the past. It looked as if it hadn't been touched in years, but Elena knew that moment was happening here. She knelt down. She closed her eyes. She remembered Gaspard's face, his voice, his smile, his touch, and time stopped. She took a deep breath. Her heart no longer governed the rhythm of her body. It felt as if it was synchronized with the universe itself. When she opened her eyes, a beam of light appeared before her. The door was opening. In that moment, as Lucien had said, she wasn't trying to force time. She was flowing within it, and time was offering her a chance to pass through again. She couldn't miss this. Elena stepped into the light, and the world disappeared once again. As the light pulled Elena in, everything became blurred. There was a coolness enveloping her body, but this cold wasn't a threat. It was something calming. It was as if she was stepping into a void, disregarding even time itself. Sounds, images, even everything felt, all blended together. Elena took steps without pausing for a moment. This place wasn't one she knew, but she instantly recognized it as something unfamiliar. Time itself was a kind of transition point here, where everything intertwined. Any memory, past or future, existed at the same time here. It was such a deep transition that she couldn't even feel how much time had passed. The only thing she could feel was the sensation of her body being dragged through a void. She closed her eyes and thought of Gaspard again. Gaspard, I have to find you again. This thought sped her up, her steps growing more determined. As much as time here was both ancient and new, Elena was just as old and new. She was somewhere between the past and the future, in a place where she didn't fully know who she was. But in that moment, one thing was certain. She would return to Gaspard. When she opened her eyes again, the light had faded, replaced by a dim darkness. But this darkness wasn't frightening. On the contrary, it created a sense of peace within Elena. Something was going right. She took another step forward, and finally a large door appeared before her. The door was old, made of wrought iron, and had withstood time. But it was the door that had brought her here. Without hesitation, Elena reached out to open it. The door opened much more easily than Elena had expected. At first glance, when she entered, everything looked just like it had in the past. But something was missing. The air had changed, cold and sharply different. There was only one thought in her mind. She would find Gaspard, and they would be reunited. As Elena wandered through the corridors of the Palace of Versailles, her heart raced with every step. She thought she would see the young, handsome man she had once loved. No matter how far away her dreams were, she hoped she would find him, and everything would be as it once was. But in the end, the scene that awaited her in a hidden corner of the palace shattered all her dreams. When she found Gaspard, she was shocked. Before her stood an old, collapsed man. The cruel marks of time were deeply etched into every step he took, every line on his face. Gaspard was now 80 years old. The years had taken over his face and body, but for Elena, the time that had passed felt like just a few days. Gaspard had waited for her a lifetime, hoping for her return every moment. "I knew you'd come," Gaspard said, his voice trembling. "But now, it's too late." Elena couldn't believe her eyes. She remembered Gaspard as young and strong, but now before her was a man who could barely walk with trembling hands. The man who had once been the meaning of her life now stood weak and aged in her arms. Unable to control her emotions, Elena knelt down. As she held Gaspard's hands, she began to cry with sobs. "Why did it take so long? Why did you wait so long?" she said, her tears collecting on Gaspard's old hands. Gaspard smiled slowly, and with eyes full of a lifetime of memories, he looked at Elena. "I told you," he said with sadness. "Time is the master of everything, and we are its prisoners." Elena's heart shattered. As she hugged him, Gaspard's body no longer had strength. The days once full of life beside him had now become memories. He had waited for her for years, but now they only had a few days left to spend together. One morning, as Elena held Gaspard in her arms for the last time, he closed his eyes to life. Gaspard took his last breath peacefully in her hands. Elena, with a vast emptiness in her heart, witnessed the final moments of the man she loved. In that moment, she bore witness once again to how cruel time could be. But there was one truth. She would always love Gaspard, no matter the circumstances. Elena no longer wants to go back, because leaving the man who waited for her a lifetime and was now alone in his final moments is her greatest fear. Should she stay and grow old with time, sharing every moment with Gaspard? Or should she go through the passage again, return, and be left alone with all her memories? But one day, at an unexpected moment, the passage opens again. With a deep sense of emptiness inside her, Elena weighs her choice with her eyes. Time can no longer be stopped. On one side is the promise she made to Gaspard, and on the other, her own life and future. Elena must make a choice, to stay and grow old in the past, or to return to the present. If she returns, Gaspard will only be a memory for her. But if she stays, she will also become a prisoner of time, growing old in the past and living a lifetime with Gaspard. So what do you think Elena chose? What would you do if you were Elena? Share your thoughts with us in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to share it with your friends and subscribe for more content.